Just before we get started here, I wanted to say that the PopCross HQ Discord has now branched off and become its own unique art server called Art Block. It's linked in the description. I highly recommend if you're not in there and you like Discord, you check it out. While it was the PopCross Discord, I was not doing a good job appreciating all the work that the mods were putting into it, nor was I communicating well with them, and I really wasn't putting any effort into it myself, so it wasn't fair for it to remain as a PopCross thing. So I want to say a huge thank you and an I'm sorry to Kurt Studios, Wov Bandit, Arrowcat, Unknown Specimen, Moth, Artie, and all the other awesome mods that run that place and do a great job making it a fun place for artists to communicate and interact and collaborate. Again, linked in the description, Art Block, check it out. Also now community redraw submissions will only be accepted over email at popcrossanimations@gmail.com, and if you used to get your notifications for when one of my videos comes out from Discord, I'd recommend ringing the bell on YouTube. But now we can get into the actual start of this video. This month's community redraw theme is Marvel and DC fusions. I'm redrawing 5 of the characters submitted in my art style. I'm also reading out the lore and stories that were submitted with them. I have admittedly fleshed out some of the stories a little bit to make them longer, but all creative credit still goes to the people who originally submitted them, and if there's anything you don't like in the stories, assume that that's something I added. With that all said, we can get into it. Let's go! Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Arthur Blaze's life had been anything but easy. Despite being an aspiring comedian, he had very little to laugh about in his surroundings. Or so it would seem. Comedy can often stem from tragedy, and Blaze eventually found the darkness that engulfed his life to be quite grimly humorous. He'd been given up at birth and thereafter been adopted and returned so many times it was enough to make his head spin. Some had changed their minds about wanting him, some had been arrested, one set had even been considered ill-fit parents when it was discovered they practiced dangerous occult rituals with Arthur nearby. Blaze never knew his true parents, and had so many brief glimpse memories of his temporary parental figures that he had no idea who to even consider his family. With such a twisted whirlwind of an early life, he decided his life must simply be a joke. It was then that he decided to become a stand-up comedian, but along with a desire to bring laughter, he wanted to work in some danger. He wanted a way for the darkness of his life to be reflected in his performance, so he became a showman whose main gimmick was dressing up as a biker clown. He'd perform his jokes in rodeo-style shows, telling them from the back of his bike, while doing the few stunts he was capable of. It was a truly unique idea, but there was one significant problem. He wasn't particularly funny. Along with that, his strange costume turned many audience members away. He was nothing if not determined, however, so to try and get more notoriety, he sent a tape of his show to his favorite comedian, a well-known man who had a comedy talk show. Arthur thought if he could get his footage shown on there, everything would change for him. And, in a way, that did happen. The comedian did indeed show the tape, but not to praise Arthur. Instead, to laugh at him. He ridiculed Arthur's show as humorous for all the wrong reasons, and just outright embarrassing. Arthur's mental state had always balanced on a thin strand, and this horrible event was just enough to make it snap. All it had taken to push him over the edge was one bad day. Thinking back to his fading memories of his temporary occult caretakers, he decided to look into books on Satanism and dark magic himself. With enough determination and trialing some horribly dark rituals, he was eventually able to summon the devil to make a deal. Arthur told the fiend that he'd do anything if he could just have fame. Fame beyond his wildest dreams. The devil had something perfect in mind for the desperate comedian. He said that if Arthur were to become his new spirit of chaos, he would be well known throughout the world. As the spirit of chaos, he'd have to take an oath to stop all who tried to add any sense of order to the world, and however Arthur wanted to go about that was perfectly fine with the devil. Arthur not only agreed, but did so eagerly. His body was transformed and his mind pushed even farther down its dark path. He became a skeletal figure with green flames spewing from him. When he stared into the eyes of his victims and cackled through chattering teeth, he could burn their souls right out of their bodies. He took on the name Funnybone and painted clown makeup on his skeletal face to further reference his previous life as the biker clown, ridiculed on television. The first thing he did with his powers was storm the set of his former favorite comedian's show while it was live and eviscerated the man who'd shamed him. Killing this man caused a nationwide manhunt to begin for Arthur. One day into his new position and he already had the fame he craved. But of course that was only the beginning of his time in this form. He still had to do his part for his Dark Master and soon had his sights set on the man he believed was the greatest enemy of chaos in this world, Spider-Bat. I'm not doing full design notes in this episode, but I did just want to say awesome submission from Nerd Comics Inc. Nerd Comics Inc. has submitted a ton of awesome submissions before that have been in heavy contenders many times, and I was super glad to finally do this one, and the thing that sold me on it, even though I didn't draw it myself, was the chattering teeth chain that you drew. I thought that was a super cool idea. Also, just for all the stories in this episode, because I would have had to change a few things too much in each of them to make them canonical to my Marvel DC Fusion universes, I've just decided that they're one-offs that aren't canon to the universes I've made already. But again, loved this submission, loved redrawing it, and I hope you all enjoy the final version of it in my art style. Being born on the island of Asgard often implies that a child will come to be with incredible strength and might. But additionally, being the child of a god meant Diana Odinson would grow up to be a force matched by few others in the world of man. Diana was the daughter of the mighty Norse deity Odin and Asgardian queen Hippolyta. She spent her young life growing up on the isle her mother ruled, hidden away from the rest of the world. Training from a young age with Asgardian warriors meant she was a skilled fighter very young, further empowered by her natural godly gifts. She'd even been granted a mighty weapon early in life, forged for her from an alloy of Uru and Nth metal that channeled the might of the god Tempest. The blade was called Stormkiller, and no other soul could wield it but her. For a time, anyhow. She of course had combat training with other mighty fighters on the island, but Diana had a vicious hunger for battle that couldn't be quenched through petty practice matches. She craved a real fight. After years of being told to remain on the island and stay out of the affairs of the outside world, she eventually grew defiant enough to disobey her elders. Diana channeled mighty winds with her blade and flew from the island in search of a worthy foe to give her a proper challenge. What she found felt like a blessing from the gods for a warrior on the hunt for a fight. She found that the entire world was at war with itself. Countries clashed on a devastating scale for the second time that century, and while most saw it as a horrific event, Diana was too emotionally distant from it to see it as any more than a worthy challenge. After some analysis of the different sides, Diana thankfully decided to aid the Allied forces, and quickly set off to satisfy her lust for battle. Being a god with a weapon rivaled by no other, she single-handedly was turning the tides of war. While even this was not a particularly large challenge to her, facing entire armies single-handedly was close to the thrill she craved. Unfortunately for her, she wouldn't have the might to do so much longer. Odin and Hippolyta eventually found Diana and took both her weapon from her and her godly powers, leaving her with little more than the strength of a fairly well-muscled human. Diana was banned from ever returning home and was hurled into enemy territory and quickly captured by the Nazis as a prisoner of war. Meanwhile, her parents left her weapon in the middle of a battlefield with an enchantment on it that whosoever wields the blade, if they be worthy, will gain the godly power once possessed by their daughter. The Nazis who'd taken her knew Diana had been the godly warrior who'd scourged their forces for so long, and they began running experiments on her, though finding nothing strange as her godly powers were well and truly gone. Luckily for her, the base she was being held in was soon raided by Allied forces, led by Captain Steve Foster. She was rescued and began fighting alongside Steve, slowly learning how horrific this war truly was and the suffering that was coming as a result. She saw how her distance from it had blinded her to how important it truly was to end it as quickly as possible. The more she learned and grew alongside Steve Foster, the more worthy she slowly became of once again wielding Stormkiller. Eventually, after risking her life to save Steve and her entire troop, Diana finally became worthy and her weapon erupted across the world to find her hand once more. She regained her powers, and with new vision of what needed doing, she used her strength to help end the war once and for all. In doing so, she became one of the world's first great superheroes, soon to be joined by many more. She'd become a founding member of the Avenging League, alongside the likes of Iron Bat, Ghost of Fate, Banshee, and the Green Captain, then eventually even more. She would once again be accepted on her island home and even be given a new weapon by her parents, the Lasso of Truth, to represent her humanity and her duty to protecting mankind. But she would spend little time on the island in the future, as the world would continue to need her at many more turns to come. Byron Tawanda's submission here was really awesome. I love the glowing eyes, I love lightning sparks on any kind of character, and a combination of a character that's inspired by Greek mythology and Norse mythology was just a really solid concept. And I love the name Stormkiller for the blade. A combination of Thor's Stormbreaker and Wonder Woman's Godkiller sword, that's just super cool idea. Loved redrawing the character, and I hope you and everyone else like the version of it in my style. They say the house always wins, and your luck's just run out. This was a commonly said phrase by the notorious card-slinging mutant Gambler, aka Aileen LeBeau, or so she goes by now. Her true name is unknown to all but her. In her young adult life, she had few friends close to her, and was considered to be a mystery by most who knew her. Few were ever sure of her true intentions. She had frequent clashes with the X-Titans, but even they were never sure how to handle her if they did manage to apprehend her, as she was devious but far from as evil as other foes they faced. However, they'd never get a chance to capture her, as she'd eventually join up with a group whose leader was quite adept at keeping his people off the radar of groups like the meddling X-Titans. Gambler discovered her mutant abilities at an early age. By coming into contact with certain objects and surfaces, an aura would come out of her hands and change the object's energy in multiple ways. But most useful to her was they could become explosive. This meant that any average innocent object in her hands could become a lethal weapon, even a simple playing card. Over the first years of utilizing her gifts, she'd discover many ways to use these capabilities. She did eventually find, however, that her ability came with a potentially dangerous cost. Each time she used it and willed it to succeed, other things around her would fail. The bigger feat she used her powers for, the bigger the failure of something around her, whether that be electrical outages, slightly combustible objects exploding, or even people around her having heart attacks. This eventually led her to believe she was some kind of omen of bad luck, dissuading her from using her powers for some time. In that down portion of her life, she was roped into a thieves' guild, and while on a heist, she was noticed by none other than Striker Blood, a manipulative madman who trained people with strong powers and weak morals. He'd noticed the few fleeting times that Aileen had allowed herself to use her powers to get out of a jam, and was intrigued by them. He presented her with an opportunity to join a group of people just like her, to train under his guidance and become the best she could be, not only using her powers freely, but pushing them to find new potential. Aileen hesitantly took him up on the offer, believing she might gain some added control over the negative effects of her powers, and simultaneously gain some respect for what she could do. She worked for him, alongside his team, for years, honing her skills and learning how to become a superior fighter, not realizing what she and the others in the group were actually being used for. They'd track down other people with abilities and bring them to Blood, thinking they too would be helped and trained. But it was only years later that she learned those they brought in were being experimented on, and only the select few on her team had actually been given a chance to use their abilities freely. Knowing that, she ran, stepping away from her clearly villainous life, wanting to do good to assuage the guilt of what she'd done all those years. Knowing that the man she worked for so long was using mutants like her as lab rats was even enough to push her to work alongside those she'd fought against all too many times before. She took all she knew directly to the X-Titans, hoping they could help her take down Blood for good. Now, seeing Butterscotch Pecan's submission here made me realize, oh my gosh, I haven't done anything with Gambit on this channel, I don't think, and I love Gambit. Fighting as Gambit in fighting games is always super fun because I'm the cheap kind of person that'll stand at a distance and just throw projectile attacks, so shooting cards is always super fun. Combining the character with Jinx was a great idea because they both have pink glowy powers, and just the way Butterscotch Pecan fused the characters together here was really creative. The design is really well done, and it's not just a blending of design elements from the two characters, unless there's versions of the characters that I just haven't seen before. But fusions of characters don't always just have to have elements from the two suits of the original characters. You can work in elements that you think would fit for those two characters if they were combined into one, and make it a little bit more your own, and that feels like what Butterscotch Pecan did here, and I think it was very well executed. I had so much fun drawing my version, and I hope you all enjoy it. Being faced with an illness as treacherous as cancer as an adult is trying enough, but as a child, it's all the more horrifying. Pamela Connors was barely older than 7 when she was diagnosed with skin cancer. It quickly became so severe that she had to have her left arm amputated. She begged her parents not to let the doctors go through with it, and it killed them to do so, but they deemed there was no other way to save her life. Tears streamed down her face as she was given the anesthetic, but she eventually fell unconscious and awoke, one limb down. After that, she was able to fully recover from the illness, but of course was left with a significant disability. Even still, in spite of it, she was able to find purpose in her schooling. In fact, the drive to find a way to one day have her arm back pushed her to becoming a world-renowned geneticist, studying the regenerative abilities and physiological effects of plant and animal genes on humans. She knew that the human body had impressive abilities to heal itself, but beyond that knew that there were even more incredible abilities to be found out in nature. She hoped with the right combination of knowledge and practice, she could create something to not just recover her limb, but to give back something lost by every person who'd ever had a part of their body taken from them. Dr. Connors, years after completing her PhD, finally hit a breakthrough. She created a flower that produced a gene-modifying pollen, imbued with some lizard DNA and a combination of other genetic materials. She referred to the spores it produced as primal pollen, and was convinced that it was the culmination of all her life's work, a true success. Though she hadn't intended to make herself its first test subject. Before it was ready to be put on trial, Pamela herself was exposed to the substance, in a higher dose than she'd even have tested on any subject. As hoped, it was indeed able to transform her body, but not merely in the sense of regrowing her lost limb. The effects transformed her into a green humanoid lizard beast, with plants and foliage sprouting from her. Her arm had returned, but appeared as a coiled tangle of vines that she could lash out as a barrage of whips. More shocking still, she was able to control plant life around her. She thought this was a remarkable feat, and that everyone should be exposed to her pollens to both make humans more resilient and to easily allow them to regrow the Earth's forests and greenery with a flick of a wrist. Of course, with her new, menacing appearance and no proof of the effects of the pollens long term, her research and funding and even her primal pollen samples were taken from her. Some say this alone was enough to push her over the edge, and some believe her mind became altered by the effects of the pollen. But whatever the case, she became dangerously set on recovering her work and making more of the pollens to turn every human on the planet into plant-human hybrid beings such as herself. In this quest, she'd do whatever she had to get her way, and kill any who tried to stop her. She'd come to the conclusion that it was her mission to return the world to Mother Nature. Now, this submission from Arthropod caught my eye very quickly. As lots of you know, I really love drawing any kind of creature or character with tangles of vines or plant monsters, things like that. And of course, I'm partial to anything lizard-like or with a draconic kind of face. But the thing that really captured my attention was the second drawing, where it's darker with the purple hue around it, the name of the character, the eyes are glowing and really leering through us, the sneer on the face and the blood dripping down. Awesome job with this submission, and I hope everyone likes my version of it. Bruce Winston Willis was a very wealthy child. He was born into one of the wealthiest families in the world, but that didn't mean life was any easier for him. His parents had sought wealth with such vigor that when they got it, they realized that they'd never learned how to be truly happy when not striving for more. As a result, to fill the void in their lives, his mother became a drunk, and his father lashed out at his family, frequently abusing Bruce. He also had a strict militaristic uncle, who was frequently around the home leeching off Bruce's parents. The man could have helped imbue Bruce with the discipline of a military man and the strength to at least try helping his parents, but instead just sat back while Wilson was abused by his father and ignored by his mother. Even still, with all the trauma and horror in his home, Bruce still did love his family. Right up until the day they were taken from him. In his early teen years, Bruce had gone out to try and bring his parents home from a bar after a long, rough night of drinking, but they never made it home. A mugger stopped them in their tracks. In his drunken state, Bruce's father didn't take the threat seriously and swung his palm to slap the mugger playfully. The man shot him, then his wife. He took their wallets and fled, leaving Bruce in the shattered pieces of his already broken life. This left Bruce with only his uncle. The man had never really liked Bruce much, but now had to raise the boy, and did so the only way he knew how: as a soldier. While Bruce was heartbroken at the loss of his parents, he found some purpose in the structured life his uncle set out for his training. Some of Bruce's few happy childhood memories were of watching superhero shows, and through his training he started to think that he had what it took to become a vigilante to better his city. After confiding this idea to his uncle, even suggesting that the man join him, his uncle responded as any loving uncle would. He had his nephew locked away in a mental asylum. There, things did not get much better for Bruce. He was locked in the notoriously corrupt Arkham Croft Asylum for the criminally insane, and was entered into illegal experimental trials on the inmates that most did not survive. For several years, he was filled with new kinds of drugs and concoctions and subjected to all manner of inhumane trials. While these could have broken any normal person, having gone through such horrible traumas in his life already meant these tests and tortures just hardened Bruce even more, and made him so numb to pain that he essentially could no longer be physically hurt after enough time in Arkham Croft. Eventually, he managed to concoct an escape plan that saw him freed in the span of just one night. After he murdered everyone in sight, of course. He went straight to his family's mansion to find his uncle, the same as he left him, drunk, fat, and stupid. The man was horrified to see the scarred, battered return of his nephew, and after a sob story from his uncle about how sorry he was, Bruce forgave him and had him help with his new career as a crime fighter. Or rather, he killed his uncle and kept his head around as company, often referring to the severed head simply by his uncle's and his own last name, Wilson. To this day, Bruce still doesn't know if the head can actually talk to him, or if he really did go insane at some point in Arkham Croft. Not that it mattered to him either way. His uncle's training had still stuck on Bruce, and that, paired with his essentially superhuman inability to feel harm, and his inherited wealth, he was finally able to live out the dream he'd had before being locked away in Arkham Croft. He quickly thereafter became the vigilante known as Batpool. Now, ArtCore had suggested that I could change the name, and I think maybe the Dead Knight could have been cool too. I didn't really end up coming with something that really stuck that I thought was really great. So I just stuck with Batpool for the time being because it was the name submitted. But I really loved this, and ArtCore is another person who has submitted tons of times. I think there were 17 submissions when I looked through emails. And as I was choosing this one, I actually went back to ArtCore's very first submission back in, I think, 2020, and there has been a lot of improvement, so awesome job there. And the thing that really sold me on this one was the composition. Both images have cool composition, but mostly the one with the moon in the background and the batarangs or Deadpool-orangs, dead batter, whatever you want to call them, flying out, helping frame the character. The buildings do that too. It's really well executed. It's a simple design, but a simple design well done, and I had a lot of fun drawing it. Here's the last redraw of the episode. Take a look. I'm super glad that I finally did a Marvel DC fusion prompt for a community redraw, because a lot of people came up with some really cool ideas. And thank you to everybody who submitted. If you're new to the channel and you enjoyed this, you might like my whole playlist of weird Marvel and DC fusions, because I've done tons of these before on the channel, just never a community redraw one specifically. But now, of course, we can get into the redraw prompt for January 2023, which is going to be just the word adorable. You can design a creature, a character, whatever, just anything you're prompted to by the word adorable. And again, you can only submit to popcrossanimations@gmail.com now. Please do 2 poses of the character and submit a bit of lore for them. I'm going to change the characters into something else, but admittedly I haven't even decided for certain yet what that's going to be. Fantasy monsters, SCPs, I don't know, we'll see. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is a quote from a man named Trent Shelton, who phrases this by saying it directly to the person listening, and I think that's a good way to go, which is that I know you want their support, but you don't need it. When you're going after some kind of dream in your life, it is a lot easier when people in your life are supporting you and cheering you on, but you don't need them to. And if lots of people are discouraging you, they're probably doing so not because they genuinely doubt you, but they doubt themselves and they're just projecting that onto you. So when you go out there and you achieve your dreams, you'll give them an example of what is possible for them. And you might be able to make their life better by making your own life better. I hope that's inspiring to someone out there. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday with my first full Bendy episode. I'll see you there. Goodbye.